Please note, this podcast may be triggering to some as it discusses themes centered around emotional, physical, mental, and sexual violence. If you are a survivor or know someone suffering the effects of these issues, please take care while listening. Additionally, this podcast and content shared is for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be used as a substitute for medical or mental health advice. Welcome to When Heaven Meets Hell. I'm your host, Allyn Macaluso, and this is the retelling of my experience with narcissistic abuse and coercive control from my perspective. In this podcast, I unravel my storybook romance turned nightmare when an unexpected breakup revealed my fiancé's double life, including a massive web of lies, deceit, cheating, and betrayal. Together, with the help of world-renowned guest experts, we'll tackle the harsh realities of complex PTSD, trauma, and grief, illuminating these often overlooked issues and inspiring change for women facing these challenges. I want to go ahead and take a moment to offer an additional layer of protection and secondary disclaimer for this episode, as it is particularly sensitive. I've wrestled with how much to disclose for a long time and how to talk about these things in general and how to share them. And it's a difficult balance between maintaining my privacy and feeling reluctant to dive into such personal topics. But I also feel that by glossing over details or by saying, I was uncomfortable or kind of making these generalizations that would be a disservice to others who may find themselves in similar situations, because the confusion and the complexity involved in these experiences are significant. And so I believe that it is crucial to be as clear as possible. I have had so many sleepless nights thinking about this, and I know it's not going to be perfect. I know it can't be perfect, but just please know that I'm sharing this not to accuse or seek revenge, but to illustrate patterns of behavior and how these situations can start and what it can look like and how it can start as something that seems innocent, but it really manifests into something dangerous. And at the time, I was deeply caught up in being in love and the love bombing and manipulation, which clouded my perception and prevented me from fully understanding the severity of what was happening until the relationship ended. So my hope is that in discussing this is to educate and prevent others from experiencing the same. So even when I listen back, I felt the weight of it. That is me, and I know it will be different for all of you. So please do take care as you listen. I appreciate you all being here, and let's go ahead and get into it. So I met him at the airport. He picked me up with his dogs and told me that we are going to his favorite place in the world. And originally we didn't have a solid plan necessarily of what we were doing. He told me that he wanted to get on the water or be with friends or something like that for a holiday. And so I kind of packed for everything, which, if you know me, was a challenge in a carry-on, but I made it work. And so when I got there, though, and he said, taking you to my favorite place on earth, and I thought, that is so kind, and I'm honored that he would share this with me. And I said, where are we going? And he said, we're going to my family cabin. And I loved that idea. I felt, like I said, honored, and I thought that it was great. I was excited that we could spend time together like that more intentionally and be together. And I love being out in more quiet places and not in the chaos necessarily of, the holiday and all of that stuff. And so that was exciting to me. And he was kind of in a little bit of a rush. And I said, do you want to go back to your house? I knew that he lived close to the airport. And I said, do you need to go back? Do you need to get more stuff? Do you need more time? And he said, no. And I said, okay. And so we left, and and we had a little bit of a road trip, and we talked about a lot of stuff, and I shared more about my chronic health. I shared more about the sexual assault that I had been processing through, and he had empathy for it. I think I know well enough through living a life with chronic illness that you can't expect anyone to have a certain response, and I never want to put that on anyone. I don't think anyone ever there's no textbook on how to respond to hard things in life, and so I felt like when I shared that with him, he responded well and in an empathetic and kind way. And then we talked more about cheating, and I remember where we were at. I remember the turn because I've been back there and I've driven it again, and I remember saying, I know we haven't talked about this, but I just wanted to ask, have you ever cheated on anyone? And he laughed. And he said, why would you ask me that? And I said, well, I realized I haven't. We honestly hadn't been talking for that long. It had been a few weeks, and that's a trigger for me. I had been cheated on in the past, and I kind of have a little bank of questions that I always ask, and he had been asked all of them, but that was one that I hadn't asked, and obviously I'd assumed that he hadn't, but I'm gonna ask the questions. And so, I asked him that, and he laughed and said, why would you ask me that? And he said, no. And he said, my thing with cheating is I don't know why you would do it or how you would have the time to do it. And if you want to cheat on that person, why wouldn't you just not be with them and be with the other person? And I said, yeah, I know. Obviously, it's wildly wrong in so many ways and cruel and just awful to do, but I don't have the time for it. I hardly have the time or energy to live my life, but I don't know how you have the time to juggle or would have the time to juggle two people or what that looks like. And if you really wanted to be with someone else, why you would string the other person along. And we kind of talked about that, and it made sense. I was like, yeah, like that's so valid. And I just appreciated that. I was like, that's such a mature way of looking at cheating. He's so smart. And we talked about that, and that was on our conversation, and we get to where we're going, and we're driving into the cabin, and it was just kind of like a movie, honestly, is what I can say, is that we were driving in, and it was jaw-dropping, and it's stunning, and I felt like this is what I had waited for. I felt like this was a man who knew what he wanted, a man who could lead in a relationship, a man who could provide a fun and exciting and also safe relationship and partnership for me, and we could have good conversations and all of that. And so I felt like it was going to be a great weekend. All my friends had my little dot. They knew where I was, but I was just enjoying the moment. I was happy to be there. I felt like it was a long time coming to experience something like this. And it was fun. We got there and it was peaceful, and we spent time cooking and hiking, and the dogs are running around, and there was a big lake pond deal, and we're enjoying the sunset on the deck, and we went for drives at night, and he took me up to a beautiful lookout point, and you could see the world from there. And I felt like I found someone that I could be myself around and that enjoyed my company and who I enjoyed his company. And we were on the deck one night, and he just kept saying that this is his favorite place and how much it means to him and his family, and I could see why. It's amazing. And he said, you don't understand what a big deal it is that my parents let you come here. And I said, well, what did what's the context of that? And he kind of alluded to the fact that they really didn't like his ex and that she was not allowed there, and that they really don't let many people come up there. It's really a special place for their family. And he said, you don't understand how rare it is also for us to have this to ourselves and all this stuff. And I said, well, what did you tell them about us or me, I guess? And he said, well, I told them that you're my girlfriend. And I said, what? Hadn't heard that one. And he said, well, yeah, you're my girlfriend. And I know I got a smile on my face, but I was also in this moment of that memo didn't come across my desk. And he said, well, yeah, we're together. And it was an interesting time because I felt like it was just told to me. It wasn't necessarily asked or anything, but I also was like, I appreciate that I'm not, doing this whole messy, months-long back and forth, crazy, I don't know what I want experience with a guy. I appreciate that he knows and is direct, and I liked that. So it was a very weird kind of experience, but he said, yeah, I told them that you're my girlfriend. He said, let's take a picture and send it to them. We took a picture. I have it. He has it too, but that was our first picture together. And, friends would check in and I sent it to them and they said, oh my gosh, you're in love. We can tell on your face that you're so happy, or you're not coming home, and all these things. And so people could tell that I was so content and I was excited and I was at ease. And this was really something that I loved and was excited about. And it was just a very interesting time. It was so new to me, this whole experience, but it also felt right. And I hadn't been in anything like this before. So I was just going with it. That was also the first time that we slept together. Friends and family, you might want to fast forward this. I share this because I know that I am not alone in this, even though no one talks about it. And I also know that someone needs to hear it. It makes me want to absolutely crawl out of my skin. And if you're into these things, if you do these things, that's great. But if you do not consent, then that is an issue. And that is where the issue lies in this, is that I did not. And I set a boundary, and that boundary was repeatedly crossed. This is when the sexual abuse started, but the line was danced upon so closely every single time that it just kept going and it kept escalating throughout our relationship. And so I think it's important to talk about the start and what that looked like, even though it's absolutely not something I want to discuss. It has also left me with a great level of trauma to where even in working on this show, I have to pause, and I paused a little bit, probably a month ago, and working on this, and I texted my friends and I said, I just want to make sure that this is not normal. So essentially what I mean by that is that I had worked on this and I had recorded this and talked about this. And then I said, wait, I just want to make sure that I'm not overreacting to this or anything. And this is after months and months of so much therapy and working with various people on this and really digging into healing work since all of this. But I still say this because I'm still left with this trauma surrounding this. And this is the power of people like this and abusers like this, is that they're so good at manipulating you and so good at distorting the truth. And reality is that a year later, here I am sitting here saying, I know right and wrong, but wait, is this still not okay? And I just want to double check. And that is really the epitome of healing from trauma, and healing from this is learning to reclaim your sense of self and your identity and coming back to yourself and your truth and your intuition. And so when I texted my friends and I said, I'm just doing a quick little phone a friend, that this is not normal, or I'm curious, is this normal, or have you ever done this? And the responses are as follows. Quote, that's like unheard of. Quote, what the fuck are you talking about? Quote, did someone do that to you? Quote, like, wouldn't that defeat the purpose? Quote, do you need help? Quote, like, we never do that. We've never done that, if that makes you feel better. This was across, obviously, a few friends and a few different relationships. Thank you so much for answering my questions, those of you. Basically, what had happened is that we went to sleep together, and I will try to say this in the best way possible. We would have sex. He would pull out and immediately re-enter, essentially. And it took me off guard. I am not a scientist. I'm not a doctor. I don't know these things right away. But to me, as one of my friends said, doesn't that defeat the purpose? And that worried me. I was like, what are you doing? Obviously, that this was not ever talked about. This was not something I had ever experienced, and was just super odd. I wasn't okay with it. And this happened the very first time. And so later that day, we were driving. We went on a drive, and I mustered up enough. You know, we were talking about a lot of things, and we were talking about how would you want to raise kids, and what are your values, and what was it like when you were growing up, and how would you want that to look similar or different or whatever. And we were talking about a lot of things, and I mustered it up, and I said, hey, I need to tell you that what happened earlier can't happen again. And he said, what are you talking about? And I said, what you did during sex cannot happen again. I said, I don't know what that was, but that cannot happen again. We need to figure that one out. And this is a memory that will forever be with me, is that he stopped the truck, and we were holding hands, but he leaned over the console and pulled me closer and looked me dead in the eyes. And he said, I've got you. And he said, if something ever happens, he said, I've got you. And it was this very weird, oddly comforting, but oddly cold experience of his eyes and his tone. And And I felt like we were in a partnership, and I felt like, okay, if something happened and I were to get pregnant, I'm in a partnership and I'm with this person. But at the same time, you didn't just address that you can't do that. I don't want you to be doing that. And I just asked you not to. And so it was kind of like an interesting possessive where we're in a partnership. If anything happened, it's fine. But that wasn't the point of me bringing that up. And his eyes are something that I will never forget. And I say this a lot, that they are beautiful, beautiful eyes, but they are dead inside, and they are hollow, and they are dark, and they're so interesting and captivating to look at. And I think that was part of it, is that when he looked me dead in the eyes, it will send shivers down your spine, and you freeze. And so, he tells me that, and you take it as truth, and you say, okay. And then we kept going. And I also knew that this was a new relationship, and we were building something new together, and this was a new intimacy, and I felt like we were a team. I also felt like I hadn't slept with someone in that manner before, and this was new to me, and I trusted it, and I felt like we were forging something new. And so that, again, is a micro moment of abandonment, but I went with it. And so the 4th of July was a Tuesday. I flew out on a Wednesday. He didn't want to go home that night, 4th of July night, which was odd to me because we would have to get up early. I had an early flight on the day after, and he lives close to the airport. And I said, why don't we just go to your house and hang out? He said, no, that's not very festive or fun or whatever. And so we went to a hotel, and we had a fun dinner. We kind of did 4th of July there, watched fireworks, and it was interesting that we got up super early and went to the airport, and it was what it was. And it was this trip, and I left, and I said, oh, I have a boyfriend, and it's wonderful. And I was hook, line, sinker with it, and I thought it was great. I felt some discomfort in some behaviors that didn't match values, but I felt like this was new, and this was something that I'm going to give time, and something that I also hadn't experienced before. And so I knew that some things can be different in that. And I was giving it time, and I was happy, and he was kind and loving, and he loved me, and he boosted me up, and it was great. And I would say that after that is when the behavior shifted a little bit. The week after coming home, he became a little bit less available, a little bit less on the ball in terms of responding or answering calls. And it just changed a tiny bit, which was interesting. And I didn't quite realize that at the time. I just knew that he was really busy with work. And I also was like, oh, I'm just really into him, and I need to kind of, not expect as much maybe. And so it was an interesting little shift in behavior. But we were talking days later, and he invited me on a family trip of his. Family was a big value for both of us. And he said, do you want to come on this family trip? It's a really big deal. I talked to my mom. She said that you're more than welcome. Again, I was like, this is an adventure. I would love to meet his family. This is something where, they live in different places in different states. And this would be a time when I could meet them and get a sense of what makes him him. And I said yes. And I think that he knew that I loved it, and I loved family, and he gave it to me while also breaking down a sense of myself. And this is really what we see as like a pattern of psychological abuse that involves alternating between cruel treatment and random acts of affection. And that is what this trip was in essence. And so it was fast to meet his family, and it was a whirlwind of a trip, but they were doing something so up my alley, and it was a fun experience, and I wanted to go. And so I said yes. And I wanted to represent him well. I wanted to be that person and that partner. And he said, this means a lot. And I spent a lot of time packing. We were doing a lot of things, and I had to, because my flights were so close in connection, I needed to do a carry-on, but your girl couldn't pack just a carry-on for this experience. And we were gone for almost a week. And so I said, can I send a box to you? A box of some stuff, and you can bring it with you. And he said, yeah, do you just want to send it to my aunt's house? And I was like, I don't want your aunt to think I'm high maintenance. Can I just send it to your house? And he said, yeah, that's fine. Here's my address. And I sent a box of boots and clothes and all this stuff to his house. And it got there, and that's just a detail that I want to say. And I think it's important to note that. So that all went out there. Love what you're hearing? Leave us a review. If the When Heaven Meets Hell podcast has resonated with you, left an impact, or sparked any type of feels, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your reviews help spread the word, reach more people, and continue the mission of breaking cycles and empowering women. While I started this show on my own, I know I am not alone. This one's for the girls, as they say, and every form of conversation, review, and sharing helps to reach another sister experiencing the same and spread the message that these behaviors will no longer be tolerated. So take a moment to leave a review on any platform you may be listening on. It makes a huge difference, and your voice does matter. Thank you for being part of this community and for helping others discover the power of these conversations. We are going to go ahead and welcome back for a quick segment, a little bit of time with my mom. Can you speak to your feelings or initial feelings about our relationship before you met him?
Again, curious, excited for you, concerned that it was moving so fast. I trust you, and I'm going to stand behind you. So that's great. And it was fun. And there's nothing that says you can't fall in love fast, or you have to, or it can be slow and growing. And that's great too. So I don't think there's any set rule. In this case, you dove into the deep end of the pool fast and fell hard. And he seemed to be reciprocating all of that. At least that's what it appeared to be. And then it was just interesting. You just watching and go, it's all taking place there and it's on his terms. That was okay with you at the time. So yeah, I guess, like I said, super excited. Like, oh, you're so happy. There's nothing that makes a parent happier than to see their child happy. And, who am I to say you haven't found the love of your life or somebody really special or whatever, but just putting those safeguards in place is important.
Yeah. I think in my mind, part of it too was having not dated a lot. I felt like I knew what I was looking for. And then also I have this weird relationship with time from being sick for so long where I try not to take it for granted and I don't want to waste it. And so I felt like it matched. He and I were on the same page, and I was trying to not be in my head about how things are supposed to, typically go or what they're supposed to typically look like. And so I think that was kind of a contributing factor too, to like the quickness of it.
Yeah. Again, I keep saying you did nothing wrong. It just, some things happen really fast. It's like a bolt of lightning, and some things can be slower, and that's not a concern either. So it just is what it is.
He picked me up once again at the airport. We did a little road trip yet again to this place. So I didn't go to his house. We just, got in the car, him, the dogs, myself, and away we went. And day one, right away, I met his parents, and they are phenomenal people. It's hard for me to talk about. I had some time with his mom. I want to back up really quick and say that obviously when I first met him, he was marketing himself as single. Obviously that is what I would be looking for. And throughout my little bank of questions, I'm always curious about, when was your last relationship and what did that look like and when did that end and everything. And so this was around May, and he said that my last relationship had ended in March. And to me, it was kind of a quick turnaround. He said that they had been together for a few years or something. And I was like, ugh, it's not really ideal for me, but it is what it is. And so kind of go with it. And, he said it just didn't end well. And he didn't necessarily speak very highly of her. He said that it was kind of back and forth and off and on and rocky and stuff like that, but that they were done and he was single and his family really didn't like her and stuff like that. And so that was kind of the narrative that I had. So day one, I meet his parents. He was helping his dad with something and I was with his mom, and she received a phone call. She was on the phone with someone in their family and it was on speakerphone. And his mom said, he and Allyn are going to come by, or they're here right now. They're going to, be by later or whatever. And person on the phone goes, "Who's that? I can't keep track of all these women, or all these girls." And his mom just had this mortified look on her face. And I just kind of, shrugged it off and she was on the phone. What am I going to say? And so I just smiled and stuff. And she finished her conversation and she got off and she said, "I'm so sorry." She said, how family is and stuff. And I said, does he date a lot of women? And she said, "No, but his experience or situation with his ex." And I said, "Actually, I don't." I said, "I know that you guys don't care for her." And she kind of froze a little bit and said, "Oh, yeah, no, we sure don't. But that's something that you guys can talk about." And kind of shooed me out a little bit. And we went out and met the guys. And that was kind of all that I got out of that conversation. And so immediately, obviously, flags go up. This is within literally 2 hours probably of getting there. We were in the car with his mom. We had to drop her off somewhere. And so he and his mom were in the front seat. I'm in the back seat. We drop her off and he immediately says, "How was your time with my mom?" And I said, "Well, what's your situation with your ex?" And he goes bright red and pretty quiet. And then he gets pissed. And he said, "What did she tell you?" And I said, "Well, what's the situation? What is she talking about?" And he said, "I knew she would say something. This is just like her to stir up something." He said, "There's absolutely nothing to worry about." And I'm like, "Well, there's not nothing. I don't understand what she's talking about." And he kind of flipped it on. "This is my mom. This is how my mom acts. This is what my mom does." And I just go walls up in these situations. My guard is to protect myself. Also, I'm in a different place. I just got there. I'm supposed to be there for a week with these people. And I'm supposed to be able to trust you. You're supposed to be my partner. And what is going on? And so he goes to check us into the hotel. He comes out. He opens my side door, lays his head on my lap. "I'm so sorry. You have nothing to worry about. You have nothing to worry about." And we get into our hotel room. And we sit down and I said, "If there's anything that you need to tell me, you need to tell me right now." And he said, "There's nothing." He said, "She's in my past. There's nothing to tell you." And I said, "Well, I don't understand why this is a conversation." And he said, "That's just how my family is. They can't really get over how crazy it was, but there's nothing there's absolutely nothing. He said, I love you. I'm so excited for this. And I trusted it and I believed it. And he never gave me a reason not to trust him. And so it didn't feel good, but I also felt like, okay, I will trust my person. And so that was that initial conversation surrounding her. The rest of the week was really wild. I think it's really hard to kind of put it all into words. That first night was a lot. And I think it's also important to detail out these things because we moved fast and there were a lot of things at play. And I think because these things were going on, it was harder for me to understand everything and digest it all. All I know is that this trip left me sick and strung out and just a shell of myself. So that first night, I want to also say that a lot of this alcohol was to play, and that is never an excuse. And I am not a big drinker. I never have been, obviously, with my health stuff and everything that I've been through. That's not my thing. That's not my choice because I already don't feel good. That doesn't make me feel better. He engaged more than I am used to or have seen before, but it was on occasion. So it was 4th of July, so it's a holiday, or we're at the cabin, and it, I'm like, oh, he's letting off some steam. It's been a long week, or I'm kind of used to that more outdoors rural lifestyle where you're going to have some drinks or whatever. And it never got wildly out of hand, but it was more than I was used to being around. And then again, we're on vacation. There's alcohol to play. So alcohol is never an excuse. It's never a reason for any of this. But I could always see in his eyes when I would lose him and when he would be gone, and he was different. And I started picking up on that pattern a lot during this trip. He would not be there. No one would be home. And that was a concern. One night we got back, one of these first nights we got back. And again, I say all this because I feel that it speaks to not only his character, and this isn't about him. His character is total shit, and we know that. But I think it speaks to the pattern, and I want everyone to pick up on the pattern and understand what it was like and what it can be and what it feels like when you're experiencing it, because there are a lot of subtleties to it. So he came back from being out with his sister, and I got in the shower and he came in and initiated having sex. I was annoyed because, if you know, I was trying not to wash my hair. It was a good hair day, and there goes my good hair day. But he initiated sex, and it just got a little too loose, and it was taking a while. And at one point in time, I felt like he came, but he was just a little too far gone to really say anything, and it was just getting long and messy. And I said, why don't we just go to bed? Why don't we get in bed? And got him out, got him in bed, and he's literally just sprawled out on the bed, and I tucked him in, And I went to, dry myself off, brush my teeth, get ready for bed, everything. And, turn around and he's just passed out and done. And I just went and I got in bed, and that was that. And the next morning I said, do you remember what happened? And he said, yeah. He would always have this kind of arrogant, fluffy confidence about himself. He said, yeah, of course. And kind of laughed. And I said, no, but seriously, tell me what happened. And he's like, oh, And I was like, no, you tell me what happened. And I said, I think that you came inside me, which is so graphic, and I'm apologizing for that. But again, boundary blown through, set on fire and torched. And he would say, no, I wouldn't do that. That didn't happen. No. And we know, if you're a woman, And I said, I'm 99% sure you did. And it was, again, a he said, she said. But it's my body, and I believe it happened, and it's him, and he doesn't believe it happened, but also doesn't really remember and can't really say much. And he said, well, if you feel that way, sorry. And I said, you need to take me today to get Plan B. And I also want a pregnancy test because of when we were together weeks ago. I just don't feel solid about it. And he's like, you're totally overreacting, but fine. And he's like, I'm going golfing today, but I will do that later. And so he left me alone all day. I ended up spending the day with his family. He came to get me later. We went and I bought the things and came back. I went to take the test. He went out, left the room, was in the parking lot drinking and doing stuff with his dogs. And I came out and I said, it's negative. And he said, yeah, I knew it would be. And he said, are you going to take that pill in reference to Plan B? And I said, I don't know. You're in this state of I don't know. He's so convincing in telling me that he didn't. And I also believe that he did. But if you've taken Plan B, I was like, I don't want to do it. It doesn't feel good. Also, I'm the start of this trip. We had a big night that night. I wanted to feel good. And it's not something that you just take. I didn't want to do it necessarily, but I didn't want to have a child with him at that point in time, obviously. And so here I am with this person who's telling me, don't do it. You don't need to. I love you. If something happens, it's fine. And micro moments of abandonment, I was like, I don't want to. And so I didn't take it. I just think it really speaks volumes to the power that he started to have over me. I think I was still making decisions for myself, but it was heavily influenced on the partnership that I had. And had I had a partner who said, I think it'd be a good idea, or, I'll support you, or I'll be with you, or I'll sit with you tonight, or, be low key or whatever. But it was just very, very different. And so that was our relationship. And that is what that looked like at that point in time. We had a big event that night. These nights are just hard to talk about. That night is a night, again, that I lost him in the eyes. He was not there. We had fun. We would have fun, and it was fun, but I also remember walking over to his sister-in-law, and she was she's like an angel. She was so kind and calming, and she said, how are you doing? And I remember just sitting there and tearing up a little bit, and I carried on a good face with him, but I think I was having a hard time with it all. I was trying to digest the stuff with his ex. He was just there was a lot going on, showing me some different colors. We were on this crazy roller coaster ride, and everyone kept saying, this is a crazy trip. This is always a crazy trip. We're kind of wild. If you can go with this, then you can go with anything. And there was just a lot going on. There was no place to be grounded or feel calm. And our room was just like a hellhole where I also didn't have any peace. And so that night, he had started biting during sex. Again, I would say don't do that. That's not something that I had engaged in prior or that felt good. Obviously, no one wants to be bit. And he had been doing that, but to a degree where it was leaving very insane bruises on me. And in that night, that we had that event, it was to the degree of needing him to put cover up on me, having him cover up my chest, my arms, things like that. And some of the photos you can kind of see it's somewhat visible. And so things have been escalating with that as well. And it was a pattern. And so again, going back to the psychological abuse pattern that involves alternating between cruel treatment and random acts of kindness and affection. And so it was really this off and on switch of doing these things, and the biting would happen and the bruising would happen, and then so kind and would buy me a cowboy hat and be all over me and be so kind and blah 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 blah. So it was really alternating all of these things, and it was confusing, and that's what makes it all the more murky to experience. But the bruising had happened and started at that point in time. Again, not approved by me. I had said stop multiple times. This can't happen. It was hurting me. It did not look good. His sister had asked me also, where are those bruises from? And as much as I wanted to sit there and say, your brother, what am I going to say? I'm not going to say, oh, your brother did this to me. So I covered for him, and I don't even know what I said. It's not that these things weren't visible. It's not that people didn't see. It's just that it was kind of swept under the rug. That night, after this event, again, like I said, he was not there in the eyes. He passed out, got him to sleep. Later that night, woke up, and he was on top of me. Again, family and friends, you can fast forward if you would like. And all I can say is that he was not home. It was a very, what I can reconcile, very animalistic experience where I was just a thing to him. And he was not in his mind, I don't believe. Doesn't excuse it, doesn't make up for it in any way, shape, or form, but he was not present. But it was just this very, very odd, very weird experience where I woke up and he was there, and he proceeded to engage in sex, and I think that this is one of the most profoundly misunderstood moments, is that it went too far, and you get to say when it went too far, or if someone harmed you, even if they don't feel like they did, and if you're in a relationship with someone, it's not an automatic pass for sex 24/7. If they harmed you, they can't decide that they didn't. And this is something that I hadn't experienced before, and he was simultaneously powerful and I felt powerless, and he was in control, but he was out of control. And that's what I mean by him being present physically, but no one was home. And there was just force on top of me that I didn't have control over. And it happened, and it was done. And then he's rolled over and back to sleep, and you're left so confused because, again, you're supposed to be in a relationship and in love and with this person, yet that's not love. That's all I can say about that, is that that's not love. That's not right. That's not what an intimate partnership and relationship looks like. And that is just one of the hardest moments to reconcile and to understand, is that it's wrong, even though you're in a relationship and you're meant to feel like that is right and acceptable, that it's not. The next day, we were going to the mountains with his family. We were going camping, and he did and didn't remember the night and compartmentalized it. And it's just one of those things that, yet again, similar to when I was younger, I didn't have time to process it, and I shut it down and I locked it down, and I would always say, I would never stay or be around, but it's also in that moment, where am I going? I'm in this place with this person and his family, and I think I left my body and I was someone else and I was somewhere else. And something that has really helped me in working with EMDR, and specifically in the book, Every Memory Deserves Respect, it says, when it's not possible to physically escape harm, we protect ourselves by disappearing psychologically. So for me, that really is what happened, is that this traumatic event happened, and I shut it down and locked it down to be present and do what I had to do. I am super excited and honored to welcome Dr. Nadine Macaluso. She is a psychologist and author of Run Like Hell, which came out in January. Everyone needs to go and grab a copy. You will see why after having her on. She is an expert in trauma bonds, narcissistic abuse, and complex PTSD, all of which is extremely relevant to this show. You may also know her for being married to the Wolf of Wall Street and being played by Margot Robbie in the 2013 film.
I say this to the women I work with, or the men, but usually I do. It's a lot more times with women. In the beginning, when you fall in love with this person and everything's magical and the love bombing, and it's just, there's so much infatuation and so much intensity and so much passion, what I say to them is that I believe that even the beginning was a manipulation. And I say that to them, and I always say, I'm going to say something really hard to you, and I want to say it gently because I know that hurts. Because you might be holding on to that shred of like, well, maybe they did love me in the beginning. Maybe it was real. But I do believe that the love bombing, the intensity, the fast pace, saying you're a soulmate after 2 weeks,
is part of the manipulation.
Right. It's, very, very calculated. You say that there's kind of like a big five that they tend to go for in people. What is that they would look for?
Yeah, so in 2019, I read an amazing book called Women Who Love Psychopaths by Sandra L. Brown.
We love the name.
And I highly recommend it. The cover's a little scary, but I highly recommend it. And she really did this research for 30 years. Because what was happening is she was working with women who were in trauma bonds or experiencing intimate partner violence. And she's like, they were lawyers, they were doctors, they were therapists, they were very high functioning people. And so they weren't the typical way that victims of domestic violence was spoken about, with like learned helplessness and love addicts and all these very derogatory terms. So she gave them the Big Five assessment, which I have on my website, which measures 5 personality patterns: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And what she discovered was that a lot of women, not all, but a lot, like me, I'm one of them, score very high in agreeableness and conscientiousness.
I would agree.
When I read that, I was like, oh my God, finally!
Yeah. Makes it make sense.
I score very high in agreeableness, meaning I'm tolerant, I'm loyal, I'm pro-social. Relationships are everything to me. I'm conscientious, I'm driven, I'm organized, I have integrity, and I am determined to make things work. Hence why I got my PhD, right? Well, that's great in education. Not great when you're in love with a pathological lover.
Right.
And you're determined to make it work, and you're with an unhealthy person that's torturing you.
Totally. I agree with that. And I see a lot of myself reflected in those traits.
Yeah, those traits
as well, which I guess provides a little bit of comfort, but it's super fascinating how that works and how that kind of fuels their process and their supply in a sense.
Yeah. And how it feels like, and how you stay stuck, how we stay stuck, right? Because if you're all about relationships and you're determined to make things work and you're loyal and you're tolerant, you're going to stay, not because you're weak.
So we went to the mountains. We had, oddly enough, one of the best days of my life was the next day. I had this stunning day in the mountains with his family. We had so much fun, and it was amazing. I was totally disconnected from what had just happened the night prior. And then the following day we were leaving and I ended up totally sick. And that to me is when my body responded and said, we know, and you can't hide this. And I just know that I broke, and, the traumatic events that happened, I think it was a circuit breaker, and I couldn't handle it anymore. And so I got really sick. I became sick while we were there in the mountains. And then in the next days to follow. And I know that my body was responding to that. It responded quicker than it did years and years and years ago. And I think it's just an interesting thing that happened. I'm grateful for my body and for how it navigated it and how it works. I'm sad for the experience that happened. And I think that there's a lot to learn from it. I think it's very complex. I was gifted the book No Visible Bruises by Louise Snyder. I was gifted this by Victim Services of all things. This book says what we don't know about domestic violence can kill us. So this is by, Rachel Louise Snyder. And there's a quote in there that I wanted to read because I feel like this really exemplifies what happened here. And it says, he does what she does not want him to do. He continues to do it despite her objections. It's a slow erosion over time, step by step, moment by moment, whittling away until a person no longer feels like a person. Because she asked him to stop and he didn't, and eventually she gave up asking. This is loss of power at its most elemental. Loss of power at its most elemental is my relationship and is this trip and is this experience. Time and time again, he did what I did not want him to do. Time and time again, he walked the line very closely, very tightly, and then came back with love. Time and time again, he broke boundaries, but did so with a hug and a kiss and a smile and a compliment. It was a slow burn and, like she said, a slow erosion. It was a whittling away of myself and, like I say, the micro moments of abandonment until I no longer felt like a person and I returned from this trip a fraction of myself. And in a lot of ways, I don't think I ever gave up asking. The biting became a big issue for us. That would happen, but like I said previously, it wouldn't happen every single time. So it was this pattern of cruel treatment, random acts of affection. So it wouldn't happen every time, but he would do it and then I would say no and it would stop and then it would happen again. And so we were in these patterns, and it was a total loss of power on my end, and he knew what he was doing. And it only continued from there. So we're going to leave it there for this episode. I know it was a lot. If you have made it this far, thank you for sticking around. I know it is a lot to digest. If you've gone through anything similar, I think that you will understand. I know you will understand, but also that it's so confusing and complex and it's just hard. So I hope and pray that it lands right and hits the right people and the right person as it needs to. And we will pick up next week with episode 3, diving more into when things cranked up even more. So thank you guys. Thank you for tuning in to When Heaven Meets Hell, produced by me, Allyn Macaluso, and co-produced, edited, and scored by Brad Parsons at Train Sound Studio. Although less than 1% of podcasts address domestic violence and survivor advocacy, When Heaven Meets Hell strives to change that narrative by raising awareness and promoting vulnerable conversations. You can support our mission by making sure you subscribe on your preferred platform, leaving a review, and sharing the show with others. We are so deeply grateful, and we'll see you next time on When Heaven Meets Hell.